I'm going to quickly introduce this. I suppose some things that you try in life, they don't work out so well, and you never really know, or at least I never really know how things are going to go. And when in 2014 we came up with this idea, well, we were approached by Palgrave Macmillan about the possibility of writing a book on what we were talking about at the BPS conference in 2014 or 2015. And we ended up deciding that we were going to try and put a handbook of male psychology together and see how it went, to see what kind of response we might get. As you might have experienced yourselves, you don't always get a positive feedback from what you're doing, even if it's what you think you're doing is absolutely excellent and worth a lot. So we're really pleased to find that compared to other psychology books from Palgrave Macmillan, like we would be expected to have just over 5,000 downloads after 2 years. Well, after 3 months, we'd already reached that. And as things stand now, we've got over 8,000 downloads. And we've got the chapter that is at the moment, a free download, is almost at 2,000. In fact, it probably is over 2,000 now. This data is a couple of days old. So the Handbook of Male Psychology is a bit of a success story. So it's something that I think, for definite, be downloading chapter 32, which is the free chapter. But also, if your university doesn't have the Handbook of Male Psychology, just say, get it in. This is loads of people want this. This is selling like hotcakes. Get it in. This is. It seems to be. I mean, dare I say, male psychology is starting to become maybe something that people like, and maybe it's even popular. I don't know. Let's see what happens. But we might put you off the whole thing by starting to talk about our individual chapters. And in the booklets near the back, I do have a list of each chapter. So if you're interested in just having a quick look at it, please do so. But also, I'm just quickly going to plug chapter 1. Becky Owens isn't here, I don't think, anymore. But chapter 1 is about the effect of testosterone on male development. And testosterone is sometimes seen as something that's a bit scary and a bit negative and a bit about aggression. Becky Owens in the chapter really explodes that whole myth and actually shows evidence that there's a placebo effect around testosterone that means that people think that they're more aggressive if they take testosterone. And this graph here is just a kind of to give you some sort of idea that really there's a balance of hormones, a balance between testosterone and estrogen within men and women, which is very much like a yin and yang type of thing. So that every man needs about a small amount of estrogen and kind of plenty of testosterone in order to be physically healthy and also probably psychologically healthy. The evidence is more sketchy there. So, but I'm going to hand over now to whoever is next on the list here. Rob Hadley, brilliant, with Deconstructing Dad.
Thank you. Yeah, Deconstructing Dad, some of which I was talking about earlier on today. How important is fatherhood and non-fatherhood to men? What does that mean? I'm an involuntary childless man. Actually, I'm a mediated childless man. I've sort of come to terms with the fact I'm not going to be a dad. But it does have an impact on my life, and reproduction is really important to men. Although there's no social narrative or very little narratives around that for men. It'd be really weird, wouldn't it, if a species with a male and a female and only the female was interested in reproducing. As a species, we wouldn't be here now if none of the men were particularly interested in reproduction. Men are interested and have a vested interest in reproduction, and it impacts on them socially and emotionally. And my chapter title was going to be Fracking Fathers, but that was sort of dropped, so we had to have Deconstructing Dad. And it is a deconstruction. Unpick what fatherhood means, the good and the bad, and also what non-fatherhood means for men. Thank you.
Okay, I won't talk to these directly. It's a common cancer, it's the most common type of cancer in men. It's very survivable. Luckily, lots of men still die from it, unfortunately. Lots of men live with it. But all forms of treatment for localized and metastasized prostate cancer have massively unpleasant side effects, which you can see listed there, which go very directly to men's sense of self-identity. Another very important feature about it is that black men, or this African Caribbean, African American men, are 3 times more likely to develop the disease than white men. They get it at a younger age. They get it in a more aggressive form. And so there are these issues in it as well. Another slide there. There we go. So they're disproportionately at risk. Gay men, men who have sex with men, we don't know very much about their experience. We do know they experience a very heteronormative system of care. The side effects of the treatments can have particular meanings and implications for them. What I wanted to argue in the chapter essentially is that prostate cancer is a perfect illustration of how masculinity needs to be understood in terms of a host of intersections. It's a gendered issue, it's a racial issue, it's an ethnic issue, and it is a social and economic issue as well.
I'm Nathan Bristol. I'm a part-time distance PhD student in Finland, so making some EU citizenship while we've got it. I'm in the games research lab. I'm looking at how players identify with fictional characters in text/games wide, and what mechanisms control that. And I want to kill the idea that maybe people identify more with characters of the same gender as them, because we get lots of media, social media interest in female protagonists in Star Wars and Doctor Who and so on. So I came up with an experiment. I wrote a text adventure game, or a choose your own adventure story. You might remember the Final Fantasy books when we were young. I got people to play it on a hypertext website and tell me how much I identified with the character. And for different participants, I was flipping the gender of the character over. And I thought, well, okay, well, let's run the experiment to see what happened. And I was expecting that, yeah, people would identify more with their own gender. It turned out that, yes, women did, but men didn't. So as you can see, male participants, and the mean identification, this is 1 to 7 scale, exactly the same. Male characters blue, female purple, so we get the same. Whereas for women, it drops off massively when the character's male. I don't think I've got time for questions, sorry, but you can chat to me later. I did a t-test, got significance, presented this as a poster at the annual conference last year, and that's how I met the people who invited me to write this up as a book chapter. So there's already the book, and there's a follow-on experiment about in-group bias for identifying with religion. It was a poster here. So, thank you.
What I wrote about is how the provider role is normally associated with hegemonic masculinity and the oppression of women, and what I argue is that it's actually an expression of the male nurturing instinct and more accurately seen as part of a responsive masculinity. And I show how, so you can see, for example, how male earning is really strongly linked with all kind of reproduction, and provider role is linked with childcare. And if you look at the evidence, the provider role is a strongly altruistic activity. And if you want to understand it, you need to look at evolutionary psychology and paternal investment, which is really fascinating, because if you look at paternal investment, that is what enabled humans to grow their very large brains. And the big question which evolutionary biologists look at is why did paternal investment evolve, that men actually behaved so altruistically. And so my argument is that males who were responsive to the needs of females were more reproductively successful. So that is the basis, and we see it in all the evidence that, you know, Tanya was presenting this evidence previously. So males should more accurately be seen as responsive. But the point I want to make is that I don't see the provider role as being an absolutely essential part of fatherhood. Rather, it provides access. It gives men a position within the family, and once they're within the family, then you get the cascade of effects of fatherhood. And there are lots of links between once you're, fatherhood and testosterone, which would be really interesting to look at. And I'd be quite like to look at how fatherhood is linked with a provider role and testosterone. I can't do that, but that's it. But the main takeaway of it is that we shouldn't just get rid of the provider role without understanding what it does, without understanding this kind of deeper role. That I think there's a risk of just chucking it out that could have a sort of negative impact. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I was wanting to talk about the review chapter that we did in the handbook. So Luke Sullivan approached us, essentially because I've been very interested in help seeking for a long time, and run and evaluated a lot of interventions, and always found that it was women who came, but there was one intervention where men came. It was the anger workshops that I ran. But the work that we've been doing has been very much around help seeking for men and women. And I think there's some perspectives from academic clinical psychology which are important for you to hear about, which is that men find it hard to seek help for mental health problems, but so do women. And the overall statistic is something like only 30% will seek help. But there are additional factors associated with lower help seeking by men, which are conformity to male stereotypes and self-stigma, which you've heard about. I wanted to highlight this paper by Clement. Sorry, can we just go back one? The Clement paper in 2015. It's one of those papers that's been cited enormously. And it identified two key things to do with stigma that are relevant. The paper reviewed umpteen studies, and they identified treatment stigma as the most common obstacle to seeking help for both men and women. And treatment stigma is treatment associated with, it's stigma associated with seeking or receiving treatment. And that's really quite important because often we don't talk about the treatment stigma. And then the second most common stigma was self-stigma, which is holding stigmatized views about oneself, leading to shame and embarrassment. So that was the second most common. So just hold this, that's treatment stigma and there's self-stigma. But it relates very well to the work that we've been talking about today. So can I have the next slide? So it feels very much like it links to two things. One is that developing male-appropriate interventions and reducing self-stigma would be very important in improving help seeking. So over the course of today, we've talked a lot about the male-appropriate interventions of different sorts. So there's been the existential therapy and so forth. But I also wanted to highlight that improving treatment engagement by appropriate marketing of interventions to men, and so reducing stigma would also be very important in improving help seeking. And this could lead to either male-specific interventions, or it may lead to kind of more interventions for both genders. But I think the link is going to be really important if we're going to be focusing very much on the treatment stigma so that it's more acceptable to men. So anyway, any queries, please email me. Thank you.
And then the final chapter, which is the chapter that's free and available for download now until the 30th of June, which is about, Roger Kingerlee was talking about this morning, altering your therapy to make it more male-friendly. And I think we discovered there's lots of different ways that you can tweak the language that you use or the type of intervention that you present. But I think the bottom line, and I think you might agree, Martin, is that it's the empathy that you have for your male client that's the important thing. The acceptance and the understanding. Would you like to say a little bit, Ben?
Only just to add what Mohammed was saying there, that if you want to empathize with people who are living in the life you're describing, it's like a war zone and you're surviving, you've got to enter that world. And if that's the way you express yourself through that music, you've got to empathize with what the hell it's trying to say, the pain behind it. And people are normally only violent and aggressive when they're in pain or threatened. And no one wants to be violent and aggressive. And everyone wants to live a life where they're at peace and they're not under threat. But if you are under threat, you've got to protect yourself. And that's what you're saying. And so if you want to make a male-friendly therapy for your guys, you're doing that, you know. You might get into the music and help these guys produce better, music and find that as a channel, which is what you're saying you're doing, or whatever, but you're connecting with people. So male-friendly therapy is just therapy. All therapy should be friendly for whoever it's targeted at. What we're trying to do is design therapy for men as if they were women, or you know what I mean, as if they were going to communicate in a way that's traditionally more associated with femininity, and that's fine. And then I've had years in psychoanalysis. That works for me. But in many ways, men, and of course sometimes men will talk about feelings and all the stuff that we're asking them to do. But you have to do it in a way that gets them into doing it. So you have to start, like Miles was saying, you have to say, well, assume this session's the only one you're ever going to have. And then you've got the guy in the moment, and then it might lead to another moment. So really, we're all talking about the same thing. But at least this chapter it's just a start, and it's partly our attempt to do, I suppose, the fact that we're freely downloading it is trying to make a slight alternative to the APA model of the guidelines for how to work with men and boys.
I'm just going to wrap this section up. So we got lots of other stuff that we haven't talked about in these short presentations here. Lots of really, really interesting clinical work and different chapters. Yeah. So you can. So just in case you haven't got the message, you can get 20% off the price of the handbook today. I would advise you to go to your university and ask them to give it to you for nothing. That would be much better. Or you can get also the free download of the chapter, and the link is in the near the beginning of the booklet that you've got there. So that's it for this section. Martin, would you like to wrap up?
I'm going to just wrap up the whole conference by thanking everybody, the speakers, all of you for coming over both days or the one day. I'm not going to spend very long. We've run over time, and you probably all want to get home, and I don't want to keep any longer. So I just want to say thank you to all our volunteers and our brilliant engineers. We'll give a round of applause to our brilliant engineers. We've really, and all our volunteers have been amazing in making this happen. We've had technical hitches, but we have resiliently moved through them. We've talked about the biology, the psychology, the sociology, the politics, the spirituality, the poetry of gender, of masculine gender. I thank all our workshop presenters. There have been some amazing workshops, and all of the talks have been filmed. So if you went to workshops, you'll be able to catch up with the talks. Every year this conference gets bigger and better and more buzzy, and it's great, and we've now got the book. So really, we're going to do it all again next year. We're not quite sure how that works with the BPS section. I think maybe we'll keep this conference and just do a separate one for the BPS, because this is wider than psychology. And I wouldn't want our conference to become just about psychologists. I think the beauty of it is it's a chance for psychologists to communicate their work to a broader audience. There's a chance for a broader range of speakers to communicate their work to psychologists. It's a cross-fertilization. And the psychology section is going to be more an internal thing for psychologists to think about their own internal issues. This is just as important, but it's different. So really, I just want to say thank you all very much, and I have a safe journey home. And thank you for coming, and I hope you will come again. Although there are refreshments, yes. For those of you who don't need to go home immediately, there are refreshments, aren't there? Wine and cheese and things like that, and non-alcoholic beverages back in the room where we started. All the refreshments have been today in room G01 by the gates of UCL across the road. You're welcome to come back there and have a chat with anyone who's still around. Have a glass of wine or orange juice, whatever. But if you need to go, thanks for coming. So all the best, guys. Thanks so much. Cheers.